Have you been scrolling through your feed lately and heard a guitar riff that just hits different? It sounds super familiar, kind of like 2007, but also brand new? Well, you're not imagining it. That raw, emotional sound from the 2000s is back, and it's back in a huge way. So today, we're going to figure out exactly why pop punk and emo have totally captured a new generation.
Right. Let's just get straight into it. This is the big question, isn't it? How did the soundtrack of the MySpace era, the music of our collective angsty teenage years, suddenly become the anthem for the TikTok generation? It's a pretty wild thought, and the answer, well, it tells us a lot about the world we're living in right now.
And look, this isn't some niche thing happening in underground clubs. Nope, we are seeing this at the very, very top of the charts. You've got massive stars like Olivia Rodrigo who are taking that raw, guitar-driven angst and injecting it right into the heart of mainstream pop. We're talking millions of new listeners hearing this sound for the first time.
So what's the engine driving this whole revival? A huge part of it is platforms like TikTok. The algorithm there basically acts like a sonic time machine, right? It digs up these 20-year-old anthems, makes them go viral, and suddenly they're the soundtrack for today's biggest trends. It's completely bypassing the old gatekeepers like radio.
But here's the thing that's really fascinating. This goes way beyond just, simple nostalgia for us millennials. Gen Z isn't just discovering old songs. They're actually grabbing onto the genre's core values, that raw emotional honesty, and making it their own. It's like they're pulling a feeling from a different timeline and giving it brand new meaning for today.
To really get why this sound is hitting so hard right now, we've got to trace its DNA. We need to go back to the very beginning, to understand the raw nerve it first struck and the tensions that have kind of defined it ever since.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. We're in the mid-'80s, DC punk scene. This is where bands like Rites of Spring basically invent emo-core. They took all that outward punk anger and turned it inward. And for the first time, they made it okay for punk to be vulnerable, to cry. Then you fast forward to the 90s and you get bands like Green Day and Blink-182 who perfect the pop-punk formula. Punk energy plus super catchy pop hooks. This, of course, leads to that massive mainstream explosion in the early 2000s. My Chemical Romance, Paramore, they defined a whole generation's look and sound. But when the mainstream got bored and moved on in the 2010s, the genre didn't die. No way. It just went back underground, where these fourth-wave bands kept that DIY spirit alive, just waiting for the world to be ready again.
And this gets to the absolute core conflict that has always been at the heart of this music. The second bands like Green Day got on MTV, the original fans started screaming sellout. This debate about being authentic versus being successful, it is hardwired into the genre's DNA. And as we're about to see, it is a fight that is happening all over again today.
So after all those years bubbling under the surface, why now? What made it suddenly explode back into the mainstream? Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was this perfect storm of 4 totally different cultural forces, all hitting at the exact same time. Let's break down this recipe for a revival. First, you had emo rap artists like the late Lil Peep and Juice WRLD. They kind of paved the way, blending these raw emo themes with hip-hop beats and getting a whole new audience ready for it. Step 2, TikTok's algorithm just starts serving up classic 2000s anthems directly to Gen Z. Then step 3, a global pandemic hits. Everyone is isolated, anxious, and there's this deep collective need for music you can just scream along to. And finally, the fourth piece. You get a legend like Travis Barker from Blink-182, who basically acts as this cultural bridge, producing for new artists and giving this whole new wave an official stamp of approval.
Okay, so that's the how it happened. But what's really interesting is when we start to ask why. Why does this music, a lot of which came out before they were even born, connect so deeply with Gen Z on an emotional level?
There's actually a word for this feeling, anamoya. It's that sense of nostalgia you get for a time you never actually lived through. And for so many people in Gen Z, the early 2000s isn't just a retro aesthetic, it represents something more.
When you see it through the filter of TikToks and Instagram, the 2000s can look like this simpler, way less anxious time. It was a world before the constant pressure of a smartphone in your pocket, before every single moment had to be curated and posted online. That perceived analog freedom is incredibly appealing to a generation that's grown up in this hyper-digital and honestly often isolating world. It's kind of like a form of historical escapism.
And this part is absolutely crucial. The genre's raw, confessional style fits perfectly with Gen Z's openness about mental health. In a world full of polished, perfect Instagram feeds, emo music gives you a safe space for messy, complicated feelings. The lyrics offer this much-needed vocabulary for pain, and it turns what can feel like a lonely experience into a powerful, communal bond.
So we know the emotional connection is there.
It's real. But for a revival to actually last, it also has to be sustainable. And that's where the money comes in. To get why this is working economically now, you have to see how much the industry has changed. Streaming is how most of us listen to music, but it pays artists, well, almost nothing. On average, less than $3 for every 1,000 plays.
So what does that tiny number really mean for a band trying to make a living? Well, think about it like this. To make the same amount of money they'd get from selling just one $30 t-shirt, they would need about 13,000 streams. This one fact explains everything. It's why merch and touring aren't just side hustles anymore. They are the main engine for an artist's survival.
And this all leads to these massive events like the When We Were Young festival. It's this huge nostalgia-fueled pilgrimage that grossed over $50 million. I mean, that's the ultimate proof right there. The real economic power is in creating these huge live experiences for a super dedicated fan base.
So, okay, the revival is real, and it's profitable. But where is it all going? Is this just a nostalgia bubble that's going to pop? Or is it actually evolving into something new, something that's going to last?
Well, the first thing to realize is that this is a global thing. It's not just happening here. In Latin America, new emo scenes are popping up that are really focused on creating inclusive, safe spaces and even talking about local political issues. And over in Asia, you've got J-rock bands and even K-pop groups blending emo sounds and aesthetics into their music. It just proves how universal that emotional core really is.
And that right there is the key to its future. This whole revival isn't about perfectly recreating the past. It's about taking the raw materials, the angst, the vulnerability, the catchy hooks, and using those old bricks to build a totally new house, one that's more inclusive and more reflective of the world we live in today.
But, of course, the moment something gets this popular, that classic debate comes roaring back. The word poser is back in the vocabulary, as old-school fans worry about the genre's spirit getting watered down. And this brings us right back to that core paradox. How do you stay rebellious when you're suddenly everywhere? It's a real tightrope walk.
So, when you boil it all down, what this all comes down to is this. The emo revival is tapping into a fundamental human need for authenticity in a world that feels so curated and so overwhelming sometimes. It's a reminder that real feelings, they never go out of style. And that leaves us with one last question for you. In your own hyperdigital life, totally surrounded by perfect filters, where do you go to be messy, to be vulnerable, and to find your own safe rebellion?